and welcome to the Private Well Class monthly webinar, What Environmental Health Professionals Need to Know About Wells. My name is Sally Dolan, and I am going to be your host today. I work here at the Illinois State Water Survey with the Private Well Class team, and our webinar today is part of our Private Well program. The Private Well Class is sponsored, funded, and supported by the Rural Community Assistance Partnership and the US EPA. Because of our funding through the US EPA, we are able to bring all of these programs, including these webinars and our other resources, to you for free. About today's webinar, this is part of our National Well program. The webinar is not the class, but the materials follow the class. It's more of a chance for you to ask any questions that you have, whether it's before the webinar when you registered, or if you have any questions during the webinar, we'll be happy to answer those for you. Also want to point out that you have free handouts available. You have the agenda. If you need NEHA continuing education, we have those forms. And then we also have a webinar worksheet so you can follow along as we go through the webinar. Half of this webinar is going to go through some of the class materials, and then half of it will be that we will go through the questions that were submitted at registration, and then we'll follow up with any questions that you may have today during the webinar. So make sure that you put any questions that you have, and it either says question or chat. So put those questions in there. And Sarah Manderbach is here today, and she's going to compile those, and Steve and I will answer those at the end of the broadcast. So we do offer both NEHA and Illinois LEHP continuing education credits for these webinars. For NEHA, you can only get credit for each webinar one time per credentialing cycle. So for instance, if your credentialing cycle began on January 1st of this year, and you're taking this webinar, you won't be able to take it again until after January 1st, 2028. We recently have made some changes on how you request CEs. So when you registered, there was a place to request a certificate. If you did that, then you will automatically be sent one after the webinar. Katie will get those done, so give her a couple days, but you don't have to do anything else. But if you need Illinois LEHP credit, you will still need to email us at info@privatewellclass.org. We no longer offer partial credit for our webinars. You do have to be here for the entire webinar to get credit. So it's scheduled to be 2 hours, and if for some reason I talk too fast and I get done at 1:45, you'll still get a certificate for 2 hours. But if we have a bunch of questions at the end, we try and stay on and answer those to make sure everyone gets their questions answered. So if we go a little bit long, but you have to leave at 3, you'll still get those 2 hours of credit. So this is a map showing the RCAP region. So I mentioned that we're funded by the Rural Community Assistance Partnership, and that is it's an organization that's made up of 6 nonprofits that cover all 50 states plus Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. So here in Illinois, our region is the Great Lakes Community Action Partnership. But if you're down in Texas, and Communities Unlimited would be your contact. They work with drinking water and wastewater, including private wells and septic systems. And they also have programs in housing and economic development in rural areas as well. They can help answer questions or meet with a well owner on your behalf to provide an assessment. They're also able to find speakers for events and set up workshops for well owners. If you have any interest in speaking with your local private well lead, just contact us and we would be happy to get you in touch with them. As I said, our team is based at the Illinois State Water Survey, and the Water Survey was founded in 1895, when cholera and typhoid were causing a lot of illness in Illinois. We are very fortunate to work here at the Water Survey because it does have such a rich history in public health. And a lot of that earlier work was actually preserved on glass slides. So we always like to picture or showcase some of the pictures that we were able to get off of those slides. So on this here, if you look up at the upper right-hand corner, we have an old community water well, and you can see in the background of the picture that it has a toolbox marked the State Water Survey. And then if you look in the grass just beyond before you get to the street, but at the edge of the concrete there, you'll see a little cup. And so people would be able to come by, pick up that tin cup, get a drink, and then they just toss it over to the side for the next person who wanted to come by and get a drink. So we've come a long way in public health since those days. We also have on the bottom left-hand corner, this is one of the glass slides that shows following a typhoid investigation in Rockford, Illinois, where they were looking at Erickson's Dairy route to see if it was possibly linked to the typhoid cases in the area at the time. So we're just really excited to be able to show these little pieces of history to you guys. We're located at the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign. And here at the Water Survey, our staff provides applied research in topics such as groundwater, surface water, and atmospheric sciences. We do a lot of outreach for well owners and the communities around our state, and we deal with contamination and concerns about water quality and water quantity for all 102 counties in Illinois. We also house the state's well records. So if you need help finding information about your well in Illinois, we may have those located here in our building. And speaking of well logs, after the Great Depression, President Roosevelt created the Civilian Conservation Corps, the CCC. So the CCC gave men who were out of work a job, such as building lodges or trails at state parks in Illinois and Indiana. And then also in Illinois, some of the funds were used to actually go around and have the men assess water wells in some of the counties. And this is one of the well logs that we have from one of those recordings. So it's really neat because you can see that it was drilled 60 years ago, or it wasn't drilled, it was actually hand dug, and it went to 135 feet. This particular one was in Schuyler County, but if you stop and think about, that's 135 feet that was hand dug, which is pretty impressive. And then you'll see that the type of pump is actually 2 buckets and a chain. It's not even an actual pump. When we move down to the next one, or this next slide, you can see that this was actually done on March 9th, 1934. And so if you think, 60 years prior is when this well was installed. And then it has the reason that it didn't have a pump located here. So the water stands at 60 feet, a pump was taken out, and a chain with buckets on either end is found to be more satisfactory. I don't know what the problem with the pump was, but it sounds like the homeowner was very happy to have a bucket and chain system back then. So again, it's just a great history, and so we like to share all of those with you. So, as I said, my name is Sally Dolan, and I'll be your host today. I'm a senior scientific specialist in environmental health here at the Water Survey. We also have our program director, Steve Wilson. He'll be getting on at the end of towards the end of the webinar to answer today's question. And then we have Sarah Manderbach, who will be fielding the questions online today during the webinar. So what we're going to address today is the challenges and issues that we face when we're dealing as environmental health professionals with well owners. We're going to look at the well owners and their attitudes towards water wells, um, look at groundwater and wells and how they work together. And then we're going to discuss the gap between groundwater and health professionals. And then we'll wrap up before we get to the question portion of the webinar with the private well class program and how we can work together with you. So the first things that we have to ask ourselves are, what are they drinking and how is this affecting their health? Are there abandoned wells or wells that aren't protected at the surface on their property? And can these contaminate um, the well that they're using or possibly the aquifer or surrounding wells if there are problems at one home's wells? And then we have to take into consideration what kind of water quality are they drinking because um, remediation can be very costly. And so if we can find a way to prevent any kind of problems, that's always the best. That's always the best practice. You know, prevention's worth the pound of cure. So if we can address these things before they're a problem, that's always the better approach. So we do actually hear quite a bit in the news when it comes to water wells. I know right now there is a national drought, and so you'll hear a lot in the news about droughts. We're getting a lot of calls on the hotline regarding wells going dry. But different times of year, hurricane season, you get a lot of problems with flooding, and we get contaminants that are, emerging that get a lot of uh, press coverage that we have to then be able to address that when people call us and ask us about it. And then we also have to address that private well water is not regulated. So we're trying to communicate with these people, but there's no teeth in the game. So, we don't have any regulations behind us to make sure that these people are drinking the best water that they can. And a good example of this is boil orders. We have another program called wateroperator.org, and it is set up for small system water and wastewater operators. And so we get a lot of them that say that people who are on private wells will call the public water supply and say, "Do I need to boil my water? You've issued this boil order for the town. Does it affect me?" So just spreading this awareness of that these wells are their responsibility and they have to be the ones taking care of it. It's a big job for environmental health professionals to have to tackle. Two of the biggest issues that affect the water quality of private wells is poor construction and the lack of well owner knowledge and education. So not only do we need to help those who need their wells brought back up to code, but we also have to just give general knowledge to well owners so they understand that they're not regulated, that they're in charge of all of their maintenance and treatment and making sure that their water is safe. Now, of course, this always comes with challenges. The definition of a private will can vary across states. The agency overseeing the and their processes, they all differ. Illinois started requiring well logs around 1978, but New York State didn't start doing that until 2000. So they only have 10 to 15% of all their logs because it simply wasn't required for people to turn those logs in. So while we go back, to 1934 and earlier, you know, New York didn't start until 2000. So that's a big difference between the two states. Then we look at New Jersey. New Jersey has had the Private Well Testing Act. So for about 20 years, they've required that wells be tested during a property transfer. They don't share the individual results with anyone but the buyer and sellers, but they do use a 2 by 2 grid to group homes, and this helps protect home values by not singling out which home had high levels of a contaminant. Then you have states like Pennsylvania, where there is no construction code, and a drilling license doesn't require competency. You also have the state budgets limit what states can and cannot do. Some states provide a large budget to do private well education and outreach, while others don't have any kind of budget at all for it. And so, if you don't have those resources, how can you be proactive to research the water quality in private wells? And of course, when you get down to the county level, there's always disparities between those that can afford outreach and support and those who cannot. I will mention the Pennsylvania. They do have a license for well drillers, but if you look at their website, it does say a license does not imply that a driller has knowledge of proper drilling or well construction practice. The Pennsylvania Geological Survey does not endorse drillers based on this certification. So you do have to take that into consideration if you're going to get a well drilled in Pennsylvania. And so some places are passing ordinances to require the National Groundwater Association certification, which is a voluntary process, in order to kind of beef up uh, what a well driller knows to make a homeowner a little more confident in the well driller that they choose. There are only two states, Alaska and Pennsylvania, that do not have a well code. All the other states do. But then in Massachusetts, they have 351 local health districts, which can all set their own rules. And Illinois is 5 times the size of Massachusetts, but we only have 97 certified health departments, and they all follow guidance given to them from the Illinois Department of Public Health. So as you can see, depending on where you're at in the nation, it really varies on what governs well construction codes. So who are our well owners across the United States? I, they're they come from every side of life, every social, economical, educational class. Some of them have lived on wells their entire lives. Some are brand new to it and have no idea what they're doing. And then it can be in town, it can be out in the country. So even identifying who your well owners are can be a challenge. For instance, here in Illinois, you think of Chicago, a big metropolitan area, but in Cook County, where it's located, there's actually still 3,000 wells that are in that one county. So you can find these pockets of wells and septic systems where municipal boundaries don't match up or where ordinances were passed in the 1950s that gave them their own autonomy. So I, you can never make assumptions on where there are and aren't wells just based on um, these parameters. You have to really know the area and find out to identify where the well owners are. So now we'll move on to a social science experiment that was done by Barb Luukkonen and two of her colleagues at the University of Minnesota Extension. And so what they did is they sent out surveys to 2,700 people that were spread out over 6 counties. 2 counties in Wisconsin, 2 in Minnesota, and 2 in Wisconsin, or I'm sorry, 2 in Michigan. And they used incentives to try and get people to respond. So those who lived in Wisconsin were given a $2 bill and a free test. In Minnesota, they were simply given the $2 bill. And in Michigan, they were given a coupon for a free test. And then they looked at how um, the return rates were. And so, the $2 bill with a free test, that got people's attention. They wondered, why did somebody send me a $2 bill? And I know Steve's mentioned that, Bart said that people would mail them their $2 back and say, we don't want your money, but we'll still get our well tested. And so then they also looked at how people thought about their well, and not only did they try to get them to test, but they wanted to know what prevented them from testing in the past. And so 52% of the respondents said that they were not worried about possible health risk from untreated well water. So that's kind of concerning that, that there wasn't even that worry or thought that they needed to test their well. And then, you look in 10th place is, I don't want to know at 8%. So, they just didn't want to know what was in their well water. And so whenever we look a little bit closer at this, we see that 35% don't know how to test. So I don't know how to do it, so I just don't do it. Um, a quarter of them thought that, well, it's probably fine. Well, what do I need to test for it? It's going to be okay. And then one of the things that's becoming an even bigger issue is the testing costs. 17% thought that it was too much, and the prices have only gone up since this study was done. And, and whenever we deal with people who um, are well owners and trying to convince them to test their well, one of the biggest things people come back with is, we've been drinking this water for years. It's been fine, or my grandparents lived in this house and they both lived until their 90s, so there's nothing wrong with the water. It's probably fine. And then the last one, again, I don't want to know. I know Steve worked with an individual that they were doing testing, and the guy said, you can do the testing, but don't let me know what the results are. And whenever they talked to the gentleman a little bit more, it turned out that in the state of Illinois, you have to sign off if you know something's wrong with your well before you can do a property transfer. And he wanted to honestly be able to sign off that he didn't know if anything was wrong, that anything was wrong with his well. And he was afraid that if the study they were wanting to do came back with something, he couldn't mark that there wasn't anything wrong with his well. So you really have to take into the psychology that people are using on why they don't want to test in order to address the ways to get them to test. And so, why are they so hard uh, to reach? It's a variety of things. It's, the belief that the water's deep underground, so it's safe from everything. It's human nature. It's when you go to the dentist or doctor, sometimes you put it off for a while because you don't want to know if there is something wrong. So you just kind of kick the can, so to speak, and push it off for a while. There's also the cost involved or perceived cost. There are places that have free testing, but people just don't know that those options exist. The history of no one's ever gotten sick. Well, just because you're used to the well water doesn't mean that if your grandkids come over to visit, that they won't get sick from the water. So you you need to look at the big picture, not just the people that are always drinking the water. And then there's just the overall lack of understanding, distrust of the government, and a, a need to be independent. A lot of people that live out in the country that are on well water, they're used to taking care of things themselves, and they don't want any interference in that. So Now we'll move on and talk a little bit more about um, the geology and the types of the water wells. So whenever we have a water well, you have to get the well you have to get the well water from somewhere. And so typically it goes into an aquifer. But depending on what kind of aquifer you have available, that's what determines what type of well gets drilled on your property. So a dug and bored well are usually less than 50 feet and 3 feet in diameter. Uh, Drilled and driven wells usually go into sand and gravel aquifer, and those are the ones that require a screen. Sand and gravel aquifers have a porosity of around 30%. So if you have 100 feet of sand, you'd have 30 feet of water. So they're very prolific and provide a lot of water for a homeowner. A drilled well can also be in bedrock, and bedrock wells rely on the cracks and fissures in the rock that allow the water to flow into the casing. That's why they're not cased all the way to the bottom like a sand and gravel well are. And then you may have two choices or three choices, multiple choices depending on where you live. Some of these aquifers lay on top of one another. So, here in Champaign, we actually have that very thing. We have the Glassford Aquifer and the Mahomet Aquifer on top of each other. But you can also go much deeper down and put a well in bedrock, but that's very expensive. The water quality is not that much better. So, you typically people stay in the one of the top two, the Glassford or the Mahomet aquifers. But then other places may not have a choice and treatment may be needed from the very beginning. So you really have to understand what aquifers you have to choose from and um, talk to the right people to find out what the differences are and make sure you understand them before you install a well into one of them. So with the dug and bored well, like I said, this is typically a 3 foot diameter. And if you can see in this picture here, underneath the truck, you have the hole where they're actually drilling. And so you can see that it's a rather large hole. And the casing is made up of concrete tile usually. And so they put those concrete tiles into the ground. They're not sealed at the edges, and so then the water seeps in from the water table and thin sand lenses, and that's how the water fills that. And so that's why you need that wide diameter, is you have to have enough volume to be able to store water as it trickles in to make sure that there's enough for the home to operate on. Now, these are three examples of bored and dug wells. So you have up at the top left-hand corner, this is a very old dug well that, it's just covered with tin pieces and concrete blocks. So, it's not a very secure well by any means. And on the right-hand side, you have a more typical bored well where you have the concrete casing sticking up about a foot with a nice heavy lid on it. And then on the bottom left, this is also a dug well where it has a wellhead extending up and then it is covered with soil. So I'll go over those two examples. So these are two diagrams side by side. The one on the left matches the wellhead that we saw sticking up on the last slide. So that bottom left picture, that represents that one. And then the one on the right represents the one that has the round concrete topper on it. So I will point out that these come from the Illinois Cooperative Extension, so this is based off of Illinois code. So this may be a little different than how it would be in your state. So just keep that in mind. This is just an example to show you the different ways that a dug well or dug and bored wells can be constructed. So on the right-hand side, we see that we have these 4-foot concrete sections stacked up. They are not sealed in between, and so the water can seep in between those seams, and it may take overnight to refill or even longer in drought conditions like we have here. But you can see that you have 6 inches of concrete that comes down along the first two into the third um, concrete tile there, and so everything is sealed up at the surface. Or you have the option to go down, and it's a minimum of 10 feet that you go down, um, and you can fill it in with clean earth fill to give an extra layer of protection from the surface water to make sure surface water doesn't infiltrate um, those bored wells. And, like I said, during a drought, these types of wells, they can go dry and frequently do. Those are the majority of the calls we're getting right now on our hotline are related to a shallow well going dry, and people are either needing funding for a new well, or they're having to go deeper, or they're trying to find out what they can do to get through until the drought ends. It's not a good idea to haul in water to refill a well like this, because just like the water can seep in, water can also seep out. So if you come in and you pour water into this, hoping that it will hold it, that water is just going to seep out. So it's just going to be a waste of money that you spend on hauling in water. Next up, we have our sand and gravel wells. And a sand and gravel well will typically have a woven stainless steel screen that's pictured here on the right. And the slot size is determined by the size of the sand that the driller brings up. So in glaciated areas, the glaciers drop larger particles first, and then they drop smaller particles that fall out a little bit later. So as you drill down, you can see these stratification layers. So a driller, when they go down, they're going to be looking for that coarser material. Um, so you have less likelihood of the pump sucking up that sand into the pump. So when we look at a sand and gravel well, we'll actually see that the casing goes all the way down to the bottom, except for the bottom 4 or 5 feet, which has that screen on it. And again, that screen is there to allow the water in, but keep the sand out. So think of it just like your window screen, where it lets the air through, but it doesn't let the bugs through. And so that's why you have that screen all the way at the bottom. And then since it is cased all the way down, you do have that grout seal that goes down as far as the driller can get it. And so that way, the only place that water can enter the well is through that screen at the very bottom. Now, this is an example of an Illinois well log. And so, we'll look at the bottom right-hand corner. We actually can see the geology layers. Um, and so, as I explained earlier, whenever you do a sand and gravel well, you'll see that this driller went through a couple layers of sand before he came down to 290 to 295 feet. So that's that 5-foot screen was put into that sand and gravel that was a little coarser than the sand layer up above it. So this allows you to see exactly where the well was installed at. This is the same well log, it's just a different view of it, where they show, the top of, if you look at the very bottom left, you'll see top of the screen was at 291 feet and the bottom of the screen was 295 feet. So this is just a same well log, just a different type of view. So you can see exactly where that screen falls on a sand and gravel well. We also have bedrock wells. Now, these wells are a little bit different than your sand and gravel wells. That casing only goes down 10 to 20 feet because the water comes in through the cracks and the fissures of the rock, and that's where your water is carried. So the rock itself doesn't necessarily hold water, so you have to use those cracks in the rocks, and that's where the water comes in. So you have to leave the casing open in order for it to catch as many cracks and crevices that it can to help keep the water in the well. One thing to point out with bedrock wells is even though they can be very deep, um, it's those cracks that you have to worry about. It could be a crack that starts at the ground level and comes down and intersects your well, 20, 30 feet down. And so you have no idea that it actually got its start from the surface. And so that can allow the influence of surface water into a bedrock well. So that is something to um, take into consideration if you're dealing with bedrock wells. Again, this is another Illinois well record example, and this one is for a bedrock well. Again, we look down here in the bottom right, and we can see that the rock that they're pulling the water from is actually the limestone layers. The driller did put on number 12 that the water is from shale, but shale does not hold water, so we know that that water is actually coming from the limestone. It is not coming from the shale. The shale is just where the um, well was terminated at. Give me just a second to take a drink here. So we know poor construction is a problem, but how do we address it? In northern climates, wells used to be placed in a pit to get it below the frost line, and there are still several that still have those pits today. And one of the main issues is that it allows rainwater to fill the pit, essentially flooding the well, which allows surface water to infiltrate the well. And so these old wells with poor construction are also they can also be a safety issue. If you have this large hole that's open, full of water, and small children or animals or even people who aren't paying attention could easily fall into them and get hurt. So we really need to address these well construction codes, and the ones that are grandfathered in, we need to do what we can to try and get them brought up to standards to prevent these opportunities for contamination and uh, potential safety concerns. Here are three examples of why we need to be concerned about leaving wells open. The top left-hand corner, this is from the Washington State Department of Ecology. It was an elderly woman that lived in the house, and there was a piece of plywood that covered the well, and she stepped on the plywood and it gave way, and she actually fell into the well and passed away. The picture on the right um, is taken down in southern Illinois. Um, this gentleman was doing research on his family's farm and was walking around the the area near a cemetery where some of his relatives were buried at, and he came across this abandoned well, and the neighbor's goat had gotten loose and found its way and fell into the well and deceased. Luckily, this well was not in use at the time, but we do get the stories of people with dead animals in their well and wanting to know what to do with it. And then the bottom picture here, this was another well in Illinois. But what strikes me about this one is You'll notice that the fence posts around it are kind of bare and worn. That's because it was in a pasture. So the cattle would come up and rub up against uh, the sides of the well there and do their business around it. And so it's just not a safe situation at all with that one. What do we do with these wells? We bring them up to code. That's the only way that we can take these older wells that have been grandfathered in and get them where they're safe for people to use. In order to bring them up to code, we need to make sure that we're extending the pipe to the land surface, filling it with a clay grout, and installing pitless adapters if needed. That's our number one article on our help center right now is what is a pitless adapter and why do I need to upgrade from a well pit? And we've had over 200,000 views on that one article, which is astounding to me. And then if you're going to bring your older well up to code, the number one thing is you have to talk to the well authority or your county or a contractor beforehand to find out what the best approach is. Make sure that it can be safely brought up to code, or if you need a new well installed, and just make sure that you're working hand in hand with your local authorities because permits may be required, and so you want to make sure that you're talking to the professionals to make sure that you do it correctly. And then we also have the issue of abandoned wells, those wells that no one uses anymore. Well logs weren't required until the 1960s or later, so there's so many undocumented wells that are on file. I grew up on a farm, and I know there was one woods my grandpa wouldn't let us um, walk through because there was an old well. Um, and so, instead of filling it in and doing things, we just weren't allowed to go there. The new person that owns it has filled it in, so I'm glad after all these years it's been taken care of. But it's if you don't know where the wells are or other people don't know where the wells are, it's a really big safety concern. Because if you have these on your property and someone gets hurt or an aquifer gets contaminated, you could be held liable for allowing this contamination to occur. And then again, it's just like well pits where it's just a safety hazard and a potential source of contamination. So they just need to be taken care of. You can look in the news, and it is full of different examples. These are some older examples, but if you go and do a Google search for people falling in wells, I'm, it's surprising how many still occur to this day. I know it's probably been 2 years ago now that down in Taylorville, Illinois, um, two children fell into a well. One was trying to save the other one, and they both fell in. Um, I know there was a story down in Georgia earlier, or I guess it would have been last fall, where a gentleman lost his cell phone when he was hiking in the woods, went out that night to try and find it, and fell into the well. Luckily, police were able to use the cell phone to track him and were able to rescue him. So these stories are everywhere, and so it really just we need to make sure that when we find these abandoned wells that they're taken care of properly. So what is the process of abandoning a well? Well, if you want to know that, you have to contact your local well authority. Again, you may need a permit, and you'll always want to make sure that you follow local rules whenever you're taking care of these abandoned wells. Um, we do have an article on our help center about what is an abandoned well. And if you scroll to the bottom of this article, we actually have an actual sealing of an old well. Um, our team was able to go out with a local well driller, and he was kind enough to walk through how this well was sealed. So if you're curious about the process and want to know how it's done, I recommend that you check out that uh, article on our help center. So, what are the gaps between groundwater and health? Well, number one, groundwater is very complicated. For instance, here in Champaign County, where I'm at, there are two sand and gravel aquifers that are one on top of each other, like I've said before. And even though these are considered an aquifer system that works together, the two aquifers are actually quite different. So, you know, you'll get different water chemistry and quality depending which aquifer you end up in. Then, if you go one county over to Vermilion County, there are areas where the bedrock's only 20 feet deep, and so people have to utilize shallow wells because there's a sand seam that's only about 16 to 17 feet deep. But then you go down to southern Illinois and the glaciers didn't get down there. And so there's no sand and gravel overlay down there. And the deep aquifers are actually very salty. And so you can't drink those. So many community water supplies have to rely solely on surface water as their drinking water because they don't have groundwater that uh, can supply the communities. It's also difficult to determine if well water is tied to certain diseases like cancer. So, first off, the groundwater is ever changing. So, water quality today may be very different than it was 10 years ago when you were exposed to whatever caused your cancer. Second, there's so many factors to think about. Do you have any other health conditions? Do you have treatment on your water? Uh, did you even drink the well water? Were you drinking bottled water the whole time? And then when you test the water, you have two options. You can either test the groundwater or you can test the water that's coming from the kitchen tap, and you can get two very different results. So, for instance, lead in well water, if you sample the groundwater, um, you typically don't find any lead in it. But if you test at the kitchen sink, you'll get more positive hits from the kitchen sink because the lead's actually coming from the plumbing in the house. So it's affected by the water chemistry of the well water, but it's actually coming from the plumbing itself. So if you just test the groundwater, you may not know that the homeowner's being exposed to lead on the inside of the house. So when you're investigating these things, there's just a lot of pieces to the puzzle. And when doing the research, it can take a team to help determine what's going on because you need all those different expertise to come together. But the great thing about working with a team is that you do get all those different viewpoints and experiences, which really can help make new discoveries then. And so here at the University of Illinois, we're really encouraged to increase our collaborations across campus. So the different groups that have never worked together are now combining their expertise, and it's really exciting. And hopefully, we'll be able to start closing some of these gaps that we see today by working with people from all different backgrounds. And so I really encourage you that if you work with groundwater and private wells to, reach out to new networks and try and get other viewpoints and see if that helps you with some of the questions or the problems that you're facing on a day-to-day basis. Now, I've mentioned the Muhammad Aquifer a couple times, so I just want to show you this geological map of the aquifer and kind of explain it a little bit. So you'll see that you have this yellowish tannish color with kind of the dashes and dots down at the bottom of the diagram. And that is the Muhammad Aquifer, so down there at that bottom. This map is an interpretation using well logs to show the different geological layers that geologists believe there to be in Illinois. The Mahomet Aquifer was formed when a glacier passed over Illinois. It's about 150 feet thick in some areas. And then a different glacier came over and it left what's labeled as layer B, so that a little more tan color. So that's layer B. But overall, there were three glaciations that occurred in Illinois to create the geology. And so if you just look at this red arrow that goes down and imagine it as a well, you can see that it passes through several different sand layers before they stop down here in the Mahomet Aquifer. So I, how does a driller know what formation they're putting their well into? Well, they really don't know. They just have to use kind of an educated guess and their experience. But they're looking for a layer that provides enough water that it can supply the home with what it needs. So whenever they get to that layer, that's where they typically will end the borehole at. And, I actually received a call a little while ago from a gentleman who wanted to know which aquifer. Was he in the Glassford Aquifer or was he in the Mahomet Aquifer? And so I got one of our hydrologists involved because I wasn't quite sure what to tell the gentleman, and his response was the same thing I had given of, I don't know. It was a 170-foot deep well that was on the edge of the Mahomet Aquifer, but 170 feet that put it most likely in the Glassford Aquifer, but it was still this gray zone in geology, and so um, we can't tell him for sure which layer his well is actually in. So the actual layer may not be as important as much as what the water quality is and the water quantity to whenever you install a well like that. So what are some of the things that you can do? Who are some of the people that you can reach out to and start forming collaborations with? You'll want to start with developing any kind of relationship with your scientific surveys, whether that's a geological survey or a water survey, um, any kind of groundwater related agency, the Cooperative Extension Office. All of these people have programs or have done research or have resources that they're typically more than willing to share. You just have to make those contacts and find out who to talk to, and that just helps you increase not only your knowledge, but then it increases the knowledge that a well owner could potentially get. And so, if you don't know which of these agencies um, does what, you just want to look and find out who maps aquifers, who maintains the well logs, and who collects groundwater information. So you can just do a general Google search and try and find some of those answers. And so, you're just looking for uh, these great resources that can help you with understanding geology, hydrology, well construction, and natural water quality. So now we're going to switch gears a little bit and we're going to go into what we provide. So what is the private well class and what is our program about? And the answer, it's the answer to the question of what can I do to help private well owners understand their wells or their well water? Um, we are, as I said, funded by the US EPA. All of our programs are free of charge, so we are a great resource to send people to. For our actual class, it's a series of 10 lessons that we send to participants over email for 10 weeks. So they get a PDF once a week through 10 weeks, and then they can read it on their own pace. So it's a self-paced course, so they can do it and understand it on their own level. Then we also provide these monthly webinars, and so they give specific information that supports our 10 lessons, as well as gives the participants a chance to ask questions that they may not uh, get answered otherwise. We do have our website, privatewellclass.org, and so that serves as another resource for private well owners. And then we have all sorts of videos, podcasts, and other webinars as well. This is a homepage to our website. Again, that's privatewellclass.org. And so I've mentioned the Help Center a couple times, so you'll see that's front and center on our website. But you can also, from this homepage, you can click on Enroll in Classes at the top, and that's how you sign up for our free class. And so whenever you hit enroll, we just ask for your name, your email, and then we ask for the location because since we are on a US EPA grant, we have to show that we have a nationwide reach. So we just use that information to show that we are reaching people across the United States. Our class comes in both English and in Spanish. So if you have well owners who only speak Spanish, this would be a good option for them to learn something. We worked with a student at the University of Illinois who took this on as one of his projects, and he was able to translate this into Spanish, and he even translated the diagrams. And he tried to do it in a way where no matter what type of Spanish you spoke, it would be understood no matter what country their background was. So he tried to make it where it was as easy to understand for as many people from as many countries as possible so they could also learn about their well water. For each of the lessons, we also have the supplement um, that goes along with it. So, for instance, if you're looking at lesson one and you're really interested in aquifers and you want to know more, you can look at the different resources that we use to build the classes and get more information on your own if you want. We also have the series of webinars, and every webinar, including the one today, is recorded and put on our website and on our YouTube channel. And so you can go and watch these videos at your own time. The first half is this kind of the same each time, but the questions are always different. So you may want to go to that second half of the video and just see what questions people have asked to try and get some ideas on your own or see if that answers some of your questions. Keep in mind that you cannot get continuing education credit if you watch our videos online. You do have to attend the live version to be able to do that. So we have a series of webinars that we repeat fairly regularly for well owners so they can learn. But then we have some that uh, are given a little less frequently. So like the funding and financing, we haven't done that one since 2023 because it goes over the Farm Bill. And the Farm Bill has just been extended since 2023. We haven't gotten a new Farm Bill, but as soon as a new Farm Bill comes out, then we will take the information off the new Farm Bill and create a new webinar off of that. But this is still the information that is being used today for the Farm Bill, so it's still relevant. Then we also have a handful of webinars that we had special guests come in and record. And so like this one on what well owners need to know about lead. the information about lead in your well water hasn't changed that much. So even though it was recorded in 2018, this is still the relevant information when it comes to lead in a private well. So you can watch this, and if you have any questions on lead, and it's still very relevant today. We also have a list of resources for lead in the drinking water. So if you are having issues and need to learn more, you can find that on our webpage. We also have a YouTube channel, like I said, and on the YouTube channel, we have our training videos. And so we have 21 training videos, and this is an example of what should I know about a shared private well. And so with each of these training videos, we pick a topic and we dive a little bit deeper into it. So this particular one goes into the cons of having a shared well and what people need to know before they buy a home that's on a shared well. Our number one video with over 600,000 views is how does my private well pressure tank work? And so it just goes over the uh, how the pressure tank works and how the system uses it. And so that's a very popular one. But again, there's 21 of these videos as well as all of our previous webinars. And so, we just encourage you to check those out to learn more about private wells. We also have Tap Talk, the Drinking Water in Rural America podcast. So if you like podcasts and are looking for something, um, this could be a good one for you to look into. It covers a variety of drinking water systems. It's not just for private wells. So I picked out four of our from last season. I picked out four that were relevant to private wells. So the first one is water quality investigations, talks about biofilms in a two-part series. So while it's not all about private wells, they do touch on biofilms in private wells, so it's a good one to listen to. We also have PFAS in private wells with Jackie McDonald Gibson and Jennifer Hopnick Redmond. So they go over PFAS. And so that's, again, another two-part series. And then we have the Be Well Informed tool, which we discuss on other webinars. But if you want to learn about the Be Well Informed tool, helps well owners understand their test results. So that's a good one to look at if you'd like more information on that. And then we've mentioned the Rural Community Assistance Partnership. So if you would like to know what their private well assistance looks like, Cindy Brooks gave joined us for a podcast for that one. Um, and then exciting news, our new season starts tomorrow. So if you do follow Tap Talk, a new episode will release tomorrow. So the goal of our private well program is that we want to give well owners direct targeted information and advice. We want them to understand why their well is important, why they should understand how it works, and most importantly, we want to make sure that they protect themselves from any risk. Now, this particular webinar is what do EHPs need to know? So we have even more for you guys. So we have partnered with NEHA, so the National Environmental Health Association, and they actually have our private well class on their e-learning website, and sanitarians can actually earn up to 10 continuing education credits for taking the class. And then the American Society of Home Inspectors also provides accreditation for taking the class for home inspectors. If you are hosting workshops, or the RCAP regional staff, they host workshops all across the country. And if you're interested in having one of those workshops, again, we would be happy to help set that up. And then we have well and on-site wastewater treatment system assessment tools that we have available on our website that help you to evaluate the risk and vulnerability of these systems. And then we have our partners page and partners newsletter. And so we will move on and tell you a little bit more about those services. So like I said, you can sign up for the private well class through NEHA. You just go to our website, /enroll, and make sure that you go to where it says get CEU credit through NEHA. And then you enroll through NEHA. It takes you to their website, and you can add that to your cart, and then you can access it through My NEHA. You do have to create an account, but you do not have to be a member of NEHA to be able to get these credits for the course. We also have our partner newsletter. So once a month, we send out a newsletter. It is put together by Laura Schultz, who is on our communication team. Laura does a great job of compiling information for this. So if you haven't already signed up for our newsletter, I encourage you to do that. I also encourage you to follow us on social media so you can keep up with all the news things that we have. This is just an example from our March 2026 newsletter. So, you'll just get this once a month in your email, and we try and highlight the things that are most relevant to EHPs that are working with private wells. We also have a brochure that we have available. You can request a brochure free of charge, and we will ship it to you. And so it is for you to pass out to a homeowner, and it gives them a little bit of information on is your well water safe, and then it goes through testing, why you should test, and how to work through any problems that you find in testing. So we have actually left this blank space on the back side of the brochure for you to put your information. So you can put, a label on there saying, X County Health Department with your address and your phone number and contact information as well. I know we have one state health department that they order these on a regular basis, and then they pass them out anytime anyone installs a new water well. And so that way they have this information when they get their permit from the state then. We also have the brochures in Spanish as well. So again, you can request both English and Spanish speaking for English and Spanish speakers. So we do have those. The English come in sets of 50 and the Spanish come in sets of 25. And we are actually currently taking a request right now. So if you want to take a snap of the QR code there, that will take you to the Google form. So if you do want to request those free brochures, you can do that through that. This was featured in our April 2026 newsletter. So if you've gotten the newsletter, you can also request brochures that way as well. Now, I've mentioned a couple times about the private well assessments. So back in 2026, the University of Illinois put together a national work group from experts from all over the nation and from multiple different agencies trying to create an assessment tool that would adequately go over a private well. This was developed for the RCAP technical assistance providers, but we have since
also put it on our website so it can be completed by um, environmental health professionals as well. So this is just a great tool to be able to go out and really understand a well, and it walks you through all the different questions that you need to ask to really understand what's going on with the well. Then we've also put out an assessment tool for on-site wastewater treatment systems as well. That was created in 2023. So you have both the private well assessment and the OWTS assessments. So you can either do those together or they are standalone where you can do one or the other. So the assessment tool really needs to be looked at as a sanitary survey for private wells. So you want to use this to be able to look at what vulnerabilities exist for that particular well. Um, Not only can you educate the well owner about the specific situation influencing their water quality, but it also gives you a chance to support them as well as educate them about a good well and well system best practices and what all that should look like. So you can really promote that, and it really builds a positive relationship between the well owner and the assessor as they increase their communication and awareness and the responsibility that a well owner has in regards to their well. For the well assessment, we also have the well assessment guide. So if you are new to water wells or new to assessing a water well, this is a great guide because it walks you through step by step the things that you can do before you even go out to the site. So the information you can gather ahead of time, the knowledge that you can take with you before you go. So that way, when you go to meet the well owner, you then know what you need to focus on, and it helps kind of streamline the process a little bit. But if you have any questions about any of the um, sections or you're not quite sure how to fill it out, this guide is great for walking you through step by step on how to get those answered. Um, Again, we do have the assessment tool available for OWTS. Again, this came out in 2023. And so this is we worked with NAURA and RCAP to develop this tool. And it's a great comprehensive tool that provides the homeowner the education and understanding about the vulnerabilities that exist within their septic system. This is currently a pilot stage, so we have not created the the guide that will be a follow-up to that, but hopefully that will be coming in probably 2027, 2028 is probably when we'll have a guide that will go along with this. And so, again, this works just like the well assessment tool where you're trying to help a homeowner understand their septic systems and um, how they can be a good steward and the best practices they can follow when it comes to their on-site system. Now, one of the things that I'm most excited to talk about today is our Private Well Conference. We are holding our 6th annual conference on May 19th through 21st in Missoula, Montana. We still have a week before registration closes, so if you're on the fence, please come out and see us. We would love to see you. Our conference is actually free to attend. There is no registration fee. You do have to register though. So if you would like to learn more about our conference, feel free to click the QR code that we have here. That will take you to our conference page. We have our full agenda available as well as transportation options. And then the hotel block is also open until April 20th. So we would love to see you there and are very excited to have the opportunity to host the conference again. Um, if you're still on the fence, I'll just try one last time to get you to register today. Um, our keynote speaker is going to be Dr. Alan Wolf with the Harvard Medical School. He's actually a pediatrician out there, and he is going to come and talk to us about safe drinking water and how that relates to pediatricians and how they're addressing that. So we're super excited to have Dr. Wolf join us. We'll have a total of 26 unique presenters along with 12 lightning talks and a drillers panel. And if that's not enough to convince you, we're also going to be offering continuing education credits. So we would love to see as many of you out there. It's going to be a great way to network with other environmental health professionals that their main focus is private wells. So this will be a great way for you to meet people from all over the nation um, that have similar interests. And so we've got a great lineup, a great agenda, and really excited and hope to see everyone out there. Now I'll move on. I've mentioned a couple times about the hotline and the help center. That's one of my main jobs is along with Sarah Manderbach, the two of us manage the private well hotline and help center. So we have calls from all over the nation that come in, and we try to find them information and put them in contact with local resources to help understand their well and address any problems or concerns that they're having. Um, with the Help Center, you have 3 ways that you can interact with us. You can pick up the phone and give us a call. You can search our articles, have around 170 articles on the Help Center now. So you can, if you know a specific topic, you can do a search for that article. Or we do have Finn, our chatbot. And so you can go to our chatbot and ask a question, and it is AI generated, but we have only allowed it to pull from sources that we have vetted. So it only goes off of different articles that we've provided. We've also been able to do some of like the resources that we used for the classes. Those have been put in there, but these are it's been very vetted, and so it's not just pulling from anywhere on the internet. So it's only giving answers that we approve of. I do have a way of, if I don't like an answer or didn't quite mesh things together right, I can then improve the answer that way to make sure that the next person gets a different answer. And then if you're using the chat bot and you still are not quite getting it, you can always ask to speak to someone. And again, you'll get Sarah, Katie, or I will be the ones that will be answering those and try and make sure that everyone gets the answer to all of their questions that way. If you do want to search our help center, you can type in a keyword and then it will bring up all of our articles that have to do with that. So then you can find the article that best fits what you're looking for. And then it takes you to that particular article. So for this one, this is our is my well safe after a flood. So not only do we have a video that you can watch about wells and flooding, but we also have instructions for disinfecting your well on that same article. So we try and have it where the articles are connected and try and make it as streamlined as possible for people to find the answers that they're looking for. Then Since you're on this webinar, I also wanted to promote our upcoming webinars. So next month on May 13th, Steve Wilson will be presenting Groundwater and Well Construction 101. So that will be 1 to 3:30 p.m. Central Standard Time on that day. In June, we will have how to find local information and help from 1 to 3 p.m. Central Standard Time on June 10th. And then in July, we will be having our annual Septic Systems 101. We're excited to announce that Jim Starbird is available and will also be there as our expert question answerer. And so really excited to have Jim come back with us for another year to answer our questions at that webinar. And again, that's going to be on July 9th from 1 to 3 p.m. Central Time. So hopefully you'll be able to attend at least one, if not all of those. So now it's time to move on to our questions and answers. So whenever you registered, you were given the chance to ask a specific question. So we will try to answer as many as we can. Unfortunately, we don't have enough time to answer all of them. But if you have a specific question that either we don't get to, you can put that into the chat box. And we'll be more than happy to answer it at the end of the pre-answered questions. But if you have a question that's very specific about your states or your rules in your state, send us an email at info@privatewellclass.org and we'll look into it and we can work with you there. But we'll save this webinar for a little broader topics than that. Again, Sarah is going to be adding your questions from today into a Google Doc that we'll share and answer at the end. So make sure you put those questions in the question box. So now we will move on to our first question. So this one's about private well testing. Who can I contact from my county where I live to help test my private well? Well, this is actually the number one reason people call our hotline is they are looking for, how do I get my well tested? I don't know where to go to. So the first thing you want to do is you want to reach out to your local health authority or cooperative extension and see if there's programs in your area. Some have free programs, some have a reduced testing program. And so you need to reach out to your local offices and see. For instance, in the state of Iowa, they have the grants to county programs. So all county health departments are able to do a free well water testing in the state. So that's a great program to have. I know Penn State Extension and the Texas Well Owner Network, they have programs where they do an educational piece, and then part of that educational piece is you then get to have your well water tested. I can't remember if they're free of charge, but I'm pretty sure, like Texas Well Owner Network, it's at a reduced cost. But then you come back for another educational piece and you find out how to understand your test results, and they help you figure out if you need treatment or if everything's okay. So there's all sorts of examples of these great programs that are all around the state or all around the nation, and uh, local health departments may have been able to get grants or have money from their county health board that allow for testing. So you always want to reach out on the local level first and see if there's any programs like that. However, in most places, there's not anything. So in those cases, you have to go to a private lab. We do recommend that you go to a state certified lab and and go that route, so you make sure that you're getting someone who's qualified looking at your test results to make sure that you're getting good results out. And if you're still having problems, again, this is the number one reason people call our hotline. So we would be more than happy to help you find out where you can go in your state to get your well water tested. The next question is on emerging contaminants. So actually, the next three questions came from the same person, but they're great questions. So I divided them up on slides. And so we'll just kind of, they kind of tie together. So we'll just work our way through the three questions. So the first one is what emerging contaminants in well waters should EHPs prioritize, and are there updated risk communication strategies for these? So Steve and I sat down yesterday and kind of went over this question to make sure that we gave you the most up-to-date information. And the most pressing in our opinions are PFAS, pesticides, and manganese. Are the top three emerging contaminants that we need to prioritize. Microplastics are only in groundwater and karst areas. So if you are in these areas where you get the sinkholes, the karstic geology just allows so many different contaminants in that, except for manganese, all of these are potentially a problem if a well is in a karst area. Then we also have pharmaceutical and personal care products that we need to be looking at. And with that, going to the US EPA's contaminant candidate list, the CCL, manganese is actually already on this list, so that's why we put it as a pressing issue, is because the US EPA is actually looking at making it a primary issue for public water supplies. And since we go off of their guidance for public water supplies and how we approach private wells, anytime they add things onto that list, it's going to be of concern. For PFAS, if you're wanting to learn more about the latest and greatest with that, I would refer you to check out, we did a webinar on PFAS last May with Jackie McDonald Gibson and Jennifer Hupnick Redmond. And so that's kind of the most recent communication that we have on that. So I would recommend that you check that out. And then for the PPCPs, we haven't really been given much guidance yet because there's no regulations yet. So that one's kind of just up in the air a little bit. We know that it's going to be an issue, but there's not anything that's been done about it. So it's just kind of something to keep in the back of your head. If you want to learn more and keep on top of these things, keeping up with the CCL and the unregulated contaminant monitoring rule. And so there's a part of the Safe Drinking Water Act that requires US EPA to test for unregulated contaminants. And so every 5 years they develop this list. They're on the 5th UMCR right now. That was published in 2021, and it required testing by 23 and 25. So if you can go to those and see what the US EPA is looking at as potential problems for public water supplies, that will also help us keep an eye on private water supplies. Just keep in mind that they do look at surface water contamination as well. So things like algal toxins, that's a big concern for the US EPA, but not so much on the private well side because that's a surface water issue. So in a private well, you shouldn't have algae growing because it requires sunlight. So if you have sunlight getting into your well water, you've got much bigger problems that need to be addressed. So you want to stay on top of it, and these are good ways to find out what the US EPA is keeping an eye on. And then just keep in mind that except for manganese, all of these emerging contaminants are man-made. So it all brings you back to geology and well construction on the ways that keep a well safe from a lot of these emerging contaminants. So the next question is, during site evaluations, what key indicators should environmental health professionals look for that may signal elevated risk of contamination in private wells, especially in areas with shallow water tables or mixed soil conditions? So this goes back to our last slide where we ended with it depends on geology and well construction. So you're going to be looking at some of those same things whenever you're going out to look for risk contamination. You want to look at where the well's located. Are there any pollution sources nearby? Is it like the picture we show where it's in the middle of a livestock pasture? Are they next to a river where they have flooding on a regular basis? What kind of setbacks are there for the different things? Is there a fuel tank that's been installed very close to the water well? Um, did this, is the septic system far enough away? You're going to want to check those setback distances. You also want to look at the age and type of the well. A very old hand dug well that's not very deep is going to be um, at a high risk for contamination compared to a newer well that's drilled and has been properly grouted. So you want to look at those types of things. You want to look and see, is it in a shallow aquifer? Is it in a sand and gravel aquifer? Is it a bedrock? Because the bedrock and the shallow aquifers, those are going to be at an increased risk for contamination. You want to check for maintenance. Are they keeping up on things? Do you have any kind of damage that's been done to the well cap or the casing? Are they repeatedly hitting it with the mower or backing into it because it's at the end of the driveway? So you just need to take things like that into consideration. And then, as with anything, um, testing is going to be your best way to look for contamination in the well. So if it comes back positive for coliform or E. coli or nitrates, that's going to indicate that you have a pathway for surface water to get into your well. So you're going to want to take all of those things into consideration when you're looking for things that could potentially cause a well to be at a higher risk. I would also encourage you to use the well assessment tool that you can download from our website, and use that because that's going to show those vulnerabilities. So if you're not doing this on a grand scale, if you're looking at it, just from that particular well, that's going to really help zoom in on the vulnerabilities that exist for that particular site. And then for the last of these three questions that I have together, it's how can EHPs better assess and manage the cumulative impact on on-site wastewater systems on nearby private wells, particularly in densely developed or aging subdivisions? So the first step is to consider the well construction of the wells in the area and the local geology. Kind of see why all three of these questions are kind of, that they all tie together whenever you always have to look at well construction and geology on these types of things. So are they shallow wells in the area where the topsoil and shallow geology are all porous, like sand? Is it fractured bedrock? What's on top of this area? If this were in Champaign County, where I'm at, um, the wells are going to be in a deeper sand and gravel aquifer. And then there's the question of well construction, because septic discharge is not going to get into the aquifer itself because there's 80 feet of clay till above the aquifer, and the wells are solid casing all the way down to 100 feet. Um, you know, that's not going to be a big issue. Um, but if the shallow geology is less permeable, you know, there is a less chance of movement in the well. Um, but if the water source of the well is protected, then the only risk is if the well isn't properly grouted and the water can run um, down the annulus to the screen or to an open interval in the well. Um, but then again, testing should provide that final set of information to confirm if it's at risk or if it's not. So, by looking at the well construction and the geology of everything, that's going to be the answer to all of these questions on what you need to focus on and how you can better assess from there. Now we'll change gears a little bit. And so this one is, if you have iron bacteria, can it be eliminated by chlorine shock? And if so, what is this process? How many times should it be done back to back? And is it safe to do during a drought? So our advice is to check out this fact sheet that has been put together by the Minnesota Department of Health on iron bacteria in well water. They've done a great job of covering the different processes of physical removal and chemical treatment um, for treating iron bacteria. And it actually includes the cons of using shock chlorination. So shock chlorination's not really the go-to when it comes to iron bacteria. Iron bacteria is very resilient. So you're going to have to try to approach it in a way that will do a little bit better. When it comes to shock chlorinating and doing it during a drought, I would recommend that you contact your local health authority, depending on the severity of the drought and what you're doing. I would go to them and ask for their guidance on if it's safe to do a shock chlorination during a drought or not. So that would be our there. And to find this fact sheet, all you have to do is do a search for Minnesota Department of Health iron bacteria, and this will pop up, and so you can get that information off that. So next we have why is backflow prevention needed? How does it work? Air gap versus air brake. So when you have water pressure reduced, whether it be from a line break or a pump failure, it can allow the water to actually flow backwards. So instead of the water going from your well to your kitchen sink, it can go from the kitchen sink back down to the well. And obviously, you don't want that to happen because if there's any kind of dangerous contamination that's um, can be taken from an unprotected connection, you could potentially get that into your water supply. So I used to be a food inspector, and so I know there's a lot of EHPs on this call. So I'm pretty sure several of you have walked into a restaurant and they have the mop bucket full of detergent that they're filling up, and there's a hose from the utility sink going into the mop bucket that's submerged in the mop bucket. So just imagine you have that hose in your mop bucket, and then there's a pump failure on your well. All that detergent that you have in that mop bucket can then get sucked up into that hose and get into your water line and potentially contaminate your well. So that's why it's so important to have backflow prevention. And you can have, there's several different techniques that you can use for backflow prevention, such as check valves or air gaps, or like I have pictured the hose bib. But what these things do is they prevent the water from being able to move in the wrong direction. So like the check valve, it's like going through like a gate where you can only go forward, but whenever you try and go backwards, the gate closes behind you, and so you can't go back out. So that's why it's so important to have those backflow preventions. Then you ask what the difference between an air gap and an air break is. These are not interchangeable words. There is a big difference. So an air gap actually leaves a space. And I believe the Illinois plumbing code was 2 inches. So you have to have 2 inches of space between there. So there's no way that the water can go back up into the pipe. So if you look at this diagram from the University of Washington, you can easily see that on the left-hand side, you have that big open air gap between where the pipe comes down and to where it goes into the funnel and goes through the rest of the plumbing. But with the air break, while the two pipes aren't connected, so air can get into either pipe, but if that funnel would fill up high enough, it could potentially get into that pipe and allow backflow to happen. So an air break is not proper backflow prevention. You have to have that air gap. So I hope that answers your questions on backflow prevention. If you do still have some questions, we do have a backflow prevention article on our Help Center, so you're more than welcome to check that out. So the next question is, if there's a shiny sheen on the water around the wellhead, what are the next steps? Well, the very first step is there shouldn't be water around your wellhead. So that's going to be the first thing that you need to make sure that the area around your wellhead is mounted and sloping away from the wellhead to prevent standing water at the wellhead. And for this, this is the exact reason why you want to make sure that any surface water that's contaminated isn't staying around that wellhead where it has a chance to go down. So I found this diagram where it shows how you want that good casing, but then you want that sloping ground that doesn't allow water to accumulate around the wellhead. It allows it to run away. So you want to make sure that you do that. You also want to make sure that your well cap doesn't have any damage, where surface water could get in that way. You need to think about if there's been any recent flooding that has overtaken the well, that could have potentially allowed that contamination to get down in there. And then you need to have your water tested. If you think that it's like a gasoline product is causing the shiny sheen, you'll want to have it tested for hydrocarbons then to rule that out and make sure that that's not the problem. So those would be the next steps in that situation. Okay, and then next is how to collect a water sample from a pitless adapter. Your pitless adapter is going to be down underground, so it's not feasible to get a water sample from the pitless adapter. So what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to try and find a water hydrant or spigot before it goes into the house or before it goes through any of the treatment. That's how you're going to get um, the groundwater sample. So this picture here is actually the Water Survey's own Walt Kelly. This was the last sample Walt took before retiring, so I thought I would feature this. But this was actually a groundwater study, and so you can see that he's actually using an outside spigot on a home to take that sample. So you're going to want to have to look and see, do they have, an outside hydrant or someplace that you can get it? If not, then go into wherever the water system's at, whether it's in, the laundry room or in the basement, and look for any kind of spigot that's been included in the plumbing. But in some cases, you just have to go to one of the sinks to be able to get a water sample. You can't get an actual groundwater sample. So it's going to be a case by case basis. So you're just going to have to look around and see what spigots are available to be able to figure out where to get that water from. Now this will be our last question. So it's, how far should a septic be from a source well? So with every state, they set their own minimum setback requirements. I'll keep in mind these are the minimum. So that's the least. It doesn't say that it can't be much more. And so since there's no nationwide setback, it's on a case-to-case basis. Most states, their minimum is 50 to 100 feet between the well and the septic tank, but then it's around 100 feet between the well and the drain field. So you're going to have to consult with your local regulatory agency to determine. I know in my experience, I've had, there's one particular neighborhood in the county that I used to work, that they had built a bunch of homes in one area. Everybody was on septic and wells, but the geology allowed for us to put wells and septic systems in a much tighter distance. So we would have to issue a variance whenever someone would have to have a system replaced. So there are times that you can go below that minimum, but they're very, very rare, so don't count on that. And the rule of thumb is the bigger the distance, the better. So if you can separate those as far as you can, put them on opposite sides of the property, that's what you're going to want to do. But each site will have to be looked at and evaluated to determine what the best course of action would be. Well, thank you very much for attending today. And now we're going to switch over to the questions that you've submitted. If you still have questions, don't hesitate to put those down. Give me a second here to bring up our webinar questions. So if you have more questions, just keep putting those in and Sarah can move them over to the Google Doc as we go through them. And Steve, are you on now?
Yeah, I've been on. But yeah, I'm here. So.
Okay. So our first question is, how is a hand-dug well properly abandoned to prevent aquifer contamination? Well, that's I mentioned the abandoned well article earlier in the webinar. So you're going to need to reach out to your local health authority to find out what the rules are in your particular state and or county, and talk with them on what their procedures are. You can go to our article to get a broad overview of how it works, but keep in mind that our example was done in Illinois. So if you're not in Illinois, it may look a little bit different to you, but you're going to have to go to your local authority to find out the proper way to do that.
And if there is a state that doesn't have those rules, then you can use Illinois, or use that video that Sally showed earlier.
Sure.
as a good example, because it puts a lot of bentonite, which is clay, in the well to prevent water from the surface from getting through it. The other thing is most hand dug wells aren't tapping an aquifer. That's why you have a large diameter well in most cases, is because there's no real aquifer to put a drilled well in. And so a lot of times there won't be an aquifer to contaminate per se. It's very local water source.
And so for the second question, are the hours valid for California? Currently, we only do CEs for the National Environmental Health Association and the state of Illinois. You would have to contact California CDPDH and ask them if they would accept us for credit or not.
Yeah, and the other side of that is we just don't have the bandwidth to get accredited in every state that offers state CEUs for REHS requirements. Otherwise, we'd be glad to do it. But some of them are a lot of work, and you have to maintain records and other things that, this program is really meant to focus on private well owners, and offering these CEs is really just a bonus for all the EHPs out there that can use it.
And the next is, I've requested copies of this brochure and have not received them yet. Is there any date when they will be sent? We are planning on doing our next mailing in June. We are going to let people have April and May. We're going to ask people at our conference, and then once we get back and the dust settles from the conference, then we're going to be mailing those brochures out. We're expecting to send those out in June. Keep an eye on the newsletter, because when we get ready to do that mailing, I'm sure Laura will put that in the newsletter, one last chance to request brochures before we send the mailing. So just keep an eye out for that. But the anticipated time is probably the middle of June.
So that's for there's an update to our brochure. It's minor, but we are getting it reprinted. We do have copies now, and if you really need them, then if you let us know, we can go ahead and send you some. But if you can wait till June, that's fine too. But I believe we do have some. Katie's not here today, so we can't ask her. She's
I can say, I know we have English brochures left, but I don't believe we have any Spanish currently.
Okay, there you go.
And Steve, I'll let you answer number 4. Will there be online options for the private well conference?
There are not online options. It's meant to be, in the end, the folks who are really working on private well issues around the country is a pretty small group. And so it's an opportunity for all of us to get together and network, and a lot of good things have come out of that. And so what we do for folks that can't travel is we record the entire conference. So if you want to see the conference and you can't come in person, probably by end of June, it'll be on our YouTube channel, the entire thing, every talk, every speaker. And you can go there now and see our 2017, 19, 21, 22, and 25 conferences. And so there's a lot of really good talks there about water and private well issues, treatment, contaminants, flooding, all those things. And they're all from people who have experience with those sorts of issues. So that's, we figure, especially like we work in Illinois with county health departments, many of them don't have a travel budget. And so when we have this out of state, like we are this year, it's a way that all of those folks can see the talks, even if they can't be there. Yeah.
And then the last one is, there have been several studies that implicate septic tank effluent as being a source of homeowner well contamination with PFAS and pharmaceutical products, with a link to NAURA. For those of you that aren't familiar, NAURA is the National On-Site Wastewater Recycling Association. and they have a ton of information available when it comes to septic systems and on-site systems. They have a great homeowner's guide, and you can go and see the different presentations from their conferences that they've had. And so they have a ton of information. So if you're not familiar with them, I recommend you go and check out their website. And there definitely been a lot of studies that show that. The point that we're making is that with proper well construction and depending on the geology, the well is at less risk if it is done properly. Steve,
Well, and so there's no question here for one, but you know, if you watch the presentation that Sally mentioned from Jackie and Jennifer, they had a huge study that was funded by US EPA to look all over the country. And so they sampled in 4 or 5 different locations where there were either known sources or there was no source. And the bottom line is we already know that if there's no known source nearby, if you find PFAS, it's likely from your septic system. But as Sally mentioned, that also means that your shallow water, it means that the water coming out of your septic field is making it into your well. So that leads back to well vulnerability, where your water's coming from, all the things that will put you at risk. So on one extreme, she mentioned karst topography. If you're in an area with karst, you're going to have every type of contaminant that's available. It can free flow into karst geology. It's one place where they found microplastics. She mentioned that. You don't see it in microplastics making their way through 40 feet of even sand to get to an aquifer. The one thing I will say about Sally's slide, I think she just forgot to put the rest of the sentence on about pharmaceutical products. Groundwater scientists have been studying pharmaceuticals since the 80s. We all know they're there. Many times it's because of also septic systems, all the pills we take, all those sorts of things. But they're still not regulated. And you still have to, if you're going to deal with it, it's typically going to be dealt with by making sure you have a properly constructed well and understanding your geology. And that's, I guess, yeah, I'm not sure. Well, I'll just leave it at that because I don't know if you have a question or not, but we're well aware.
And thank you for putting the link in there for others to see as well. Well, it is 2:57, and that's all I have. Steve, do you have anything else?
No, I'm good.
Okay, well, thank you all for joining, and we hope to see you next month. Have a great day.